Uber is the latest position in my portfolio, and it's one position that I've added in this recent week. And today, I want to talk you through why I think Uber is the most undervalued stock in the market currently, and why I think it's going to have some massive gains in the coming years. Now, currently, Uber only makes up around 2% of my portfolio, with Amazon making up 27%. But as I've stated before, I want to add on to this and eventually have it at around 10%. And the stock is down currently 18% since last year. So what is the bear cases for Uber, and why has the stock declined so much? And the main fear is that Uber don't actually own the technology behind robotaxis, and these companies like Waymo will soon stop using Uber and provide their own services through their own apps. And this fear has become very real because these robotaxi companies are expanding very quickly. So there's fear that Uber will soon lose out market shares to companies like Waymo. But let's look into the numbers behind this. So a lot of these companies like Waymo are expanding much quicker than what Uber is currently expanding at. Uber grew 18% since last year, and that's enormous for a company of Uber's size compared to someone like Waymo. They added in 599 million additional quarterly trips between Q2 of 2025 and Q2 of 2026, going from 3.2 billion to 3.8 billion. That increase is 12 times the amount of Waymo's annualized run rate. And the financials of the company are also expanding at a very exponential rate, with trips going up 18%, users going up 16%, gross bookings going up 24%. Uber is still growing at a very fast scale. And if you do some maths here, it would take 6.3 years for Waymo to eventually catch up to Uber, given that Uber don't expand at all. But I argue that it's better for Uber if all these robo-taxis do actually come to fruition and provide these services that they say that they will. Because it means that Uber can connect all these different suppliers to customers and have continuously running vehicles. The main business model of Uber is running as a marketplace for all these customers to be aggregated into one service. And the reason why I think it's so important for these companies to go through Uber is because it's very costly for them to just have an idle vehicle. If they have a vehicle that's not being in use, it means that not only are they making no money off rides, it's also very costly when it comes to space in countries like the United Kingdom, where having rent to store these vehicles will add up. And early in the year, the stock dropped off of news that Waymo was soon going to be coming off Uber and providing services through their own platform. But even if they do decide to come off Uber, I don't think this is a massive concern. Uber doesn't need just Waymo to win in autonomous vehicles. They have many different partnerships lined up. They have relationships with Pony AI, with Zoox, with WeRide, with Wave, with Baidu, and with Rivian. And Uber can replace one supplier with another. For example, Waymo have decided to come off, so it means that they can provide services to companies like Zoox or Pony AI, which they're going to be doing. I think the most valuable asset here is the actual demand that Uber can supply. And that's what I think investors are missing when it comes to the stock. Because yes, you can build out these robotaxis, but if you don't have demand for the services, then they're basically useless. The best way to compare this is with Booking.com. Booking.com provides users with a host of hotels that they can book. And these hotel companies have their own app still, but they still choose to use Booking.com to advertise because it's such a massive user base looking through Booking.com for hotels. And with the reports about Waymo leaving Uber, I don't see that as a concern because I think they will be replaced anyways. Because robotaxis is here to stay. There's soon going to be other suppliers that would take their place. And Uber is not just sitting there and letting all these robotaxi companies potentially disrupt their business. They're spending $10 billion in the coming years and investing in their own fleets. And the best thing that I think can happen to Uber is if there's a massive amount of supply for these robotaxis. For example, if there's a huge network of companies providing their own robotaxi services, then that's huge for Uber, because it means that they can all be aggregated into one platform. And I bet as a consumer, you wouldn't want to have to scroll through apps like Zoox and Waymo just to find a ride. would be much easier for them just to book a ride through Uber and have the cheapest ride come collect you. And another reason why the stock dropped so much is because of Tesla. Tesla actually came up with a very interesting idea where if you have a Tesla sat idle at home, it could instead be used to provide taxi services for other people. Now, in theory, I think this is actually a very smart idea, and I think it's one that would actually work very well. However, I think logistically, it's still a long way before this actually comes into fruition. However, the demand for this has already been priced into the stock since the announcements. Tesla is still a long way away from this, I feel, because there's still a lot of regulation that they need to pass. For example, in the United Kingdom, Tesla's autopilot features are actually not even in full scale use because they still need approval from regulators. Not negating the threat around Tesla and Uber, because with the click of a button, it means that millions of Teslas could soon become taxis. However, again, I don't think it's as straightforward as that. There's a lot of regulatory challenges that they need to overcome first. And there's also the idea that there still might not be enough demand, and so people still might need to use Uber for their services. By the time that Tesla finally win approval for their robotaxi network, Uber by that time I think will become massive, and it will be very difficult to disrupt the user base that they've grown. And as I pointed earlier about the scale that Waymo is growing compared to Uber, and the fact that even with their fast pace, it just still takes a long time for them to eventually catch up to Uber. I think the same case can be said for Tesla, where it's going to take them a long time before they eventually catch up. And by that time, I believe that users will become accustomed to Uber and their platform, and it's going to be very difficult to sway them away. We're currently living in a society where people are choosing not to buy cars. A lot of people in today's market have decided that they won't buy a car because it's been so expensive to buy one and insure one and maintain one that it would just be cheaper for them to book a ride through Uber. And I think this whole taxi service network with robotaxis will change the game. I think there's going to be even more demand, and I think there's going to be even more people that feel as though they don't need to own their own car, and instead they can just book a ride through a platform like Uber or Tesla. So I don't see a world where Uber and Tesla's robotaxis can't coexist with each other and continue to grow. And the main bull case I have for Uber is the fact that I believe it's actually a good thing that all these robotaxi networks are expanding, because it means that Uber can aggregate all their services into one app. Because as a consumer, you wouldn't want to have to scroll through Waymo, to scroll through Zoox just to book a ride. Booking it all through Uber is much easier for them. And I think people aren't looking at Uber in the right way. Uber has never been about owning the fleet. Uber has always been about providing these services from the supplier to the customer. And I think overall the fear around robotaxis is overblown, and the disruption that it can cause to Uber has been overblown.